Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. Today I want to continue looking at the lawsuit between GWACS and KE Arms, which is of course associated with Carl Casarda of InRange TV, Sinistral Rifleman, Russell Fagan, and so on and so on. Now in my first video on this, I looked at a motion for basically a gag order because GWACS wanted to prevent the other people in the lawsuit from talking about certain details, most especially that Reed Oppenheimer, an investor in GWACS, is anti-AR-15, anti-military style rifle, and so it raises the question as to why he'd be investing in this. Now, quite helpfully, they put all of the details that they didn't want you to hear in as exhibits on that motion, so I was able to talk about those in that first video. However, I was looking over it again and it raised some additional questions. So I'm going to just sort of look at a paragraph here of that motion. And it says, the video, and they're talking about a video that was on InRange TV, is clearly a smear campaign of Armory and Oppenheimer, falsely claiming this lawsuit is an attempt at some form of gun control. Casarda goes on to call Oppenheimer an angel investor brought in to fund this lawsuit and questions his motives for doing so. Casarda references Oppenheimer's deposition, stating that he made pretty flagrant anti-AR-15 and military-style firearm comments. This is where the video instigates the conspiracy theory that Oppenheimer is funding this lawsuit in order to diminish the amount of AR-15 rifles on the market as a form of activism. Now, if you're wondering about those flagrant anti-AR-15 and military-style firearm comments, I covered those in my first video. But this got me looking a little bit further into GWACS, because if the question is, why are they funding sort of an anti-AR-15 lawsuit, or a lawsuit that could very well have the effect of preventing more models of AR-15 from being on the market, I thought, okay, let's do some further looking at GWACS and what they're about. Now, you saw in that last bit that they're basically saying that Casarda can't be trusted. And okay, let's assume that they're true about that. Let's look at a different source. Do we have a different source on that one? Well, let's look to the deposition of Judson Gudgel, who is, of course, GWACS, because they're not going to be able to say that this is, in any way sort of skewed or anything like that, because this is their guy. Let's see what he has to say. And one of the questions I was really looking at here is, there's actually two GWACS companies. There's GWACS Defense and there's GWACS Armory. And I was thinking, why is this? Why are there these two companies? What's the difference between them? And how does that all tie in here? So let's have a look here. I think we're going to answer a bunch of those questions as we go. All right, now I'm just looking at some select pages. The actual deposition itself is hundreds of pages long, and we don't have time for that. So I'm just going to look at some sort of selected quotations here just to give us an idea of what we're looking at here. So, question, perfect. Now, with respect to Armory, you indicated that it was owned 45-45-10 between yourself, Reed, and Shell. What was the purpose of forming Armory? So this is a great question if we're wondering about these two companies and how come they both exist. This is saying, why does Armory exist? So initially, Armory was formed to be able to have access to the weapons. When you say access, full auto weapons. Yeah, it was formed as a separate entity to provide those when GWACS Defense needed them for recording. So I'm just going to interject here, because what GWACS Defense does is they make shot detection systems. So this is something where if somebody fires a gun, it can be localized and you can try to pinpoint where that is. Now, there's multiple kinds of uses for that. One use is military. If somebody is shooting at troops, you might want to know where they're shooting from so that you can shoot back, especially if it's something like a sniper or something like that. So that's one use. But they're also used in cities to try to identify. So if somebody fires a gun, they can dispatch a police response. So this is basically what GWACS Defense produces but it looks like they needed some guns to do this. So continuing on. Does GWACS Defense hold any ATF licenses? No, never has. And so it was designed specifically to be originally a holding company for Class 3 firearms. I'm not sure how you define holding company, but that's what it was for, was just to have not just the Class 3, but any firearm that was required for defense. So GWACS Armory is originally created to be the company that owns the guns for GWACS Defense. Okay, let's continue on and see if we can get some additional details here. Now, this is a bit about how far these companies are apart, or if they're really kind of the same company is going to be an interesting question here. So, question, and that's the office where it leases space from defense? Correct. Without a formal lease? Correct. So, basically, these two companies are operating out of the same space. They have no formal leasing agreement. And we also, and I didn't sort of highlight these bits, but they're also sharing employees. This is starting to seem a little bit like they're really intertwined here. And they note, and the individuals who work for Armory, I'm sure that they go in and access the website or access their emails for Armory. Do they do that on Armory-specific computers or computers? Armory doesn't have any specific computers. So while they're accessing so they're accessing everything while they're working at defense? Correct. This is starting to seem a little bit concerning because defense has access to everything Armory is doing. Okay, but we still don't really know the full story of why Armory exists. We've heard that it's this sort of holding company initially, but they continue on here. And again, I'm skipping over some pages, so this is not just directly continuous. When you say that you formed Armory for the purposes of providing services to defense initially, right? And you say it was to be able to hold the FFL, was there a reason that you didn't have defense just simply get its own FFL? That's a really good question, right? Because why go to the bother of creating this whole separate company? Why not just get the firearms license for the company that needs the guns, which is defense? Well, they're going to answer that question. So defense has various owners, defense has various investors and other owners. It just wasn't something that looked like it was anything that any of those guys wanted to do. And we have a lot of people that have objections to guns themselves, which is why they like gunshot detection, which is what GWACS Defense is. So we've got this issue of these anti-gun people who don't want to have anything to do with the FFL because when they're, on the FFL, they might be subject to some scrutiny there. The ATF likes to know who's involved with the FFL, but these are anti-gun people running sort of what they see as an anti-gun company, so they don't want anything to do with this. Now, this is where things start to get a little worrying because the ATF might have opinions, and I can't say, the legality on this, but this is one of these situations where you get into legal peril. Because if you get anything wrong on this, suddenly you can step from okay into world of hurt with only little baby steps. You want to make really sure on all of this. And in particular, governments don't really tend to like it if you create a company for the purpose of avoiding a regulatory requirement, especially on things like guns. So this is concerning. But what we see here is that Armory is a gun company intended for an anti-gun purpose initially. So yeah, that all of that stuff about, we don't want this conspiracy theory about anti-gun motives. Judson Gudgel puts out here, and we have a lot of people that have objections to guns themselves, which is why they like gunshot detection, which is what GWACS Defense is. I wonder which investor he might be talking about here. Anyone in the comments have a guess here? Just I might have some thoughts there. So continuing on, question. So this is just a, forgive my naivete. So in order to be able to buy all these class 3 firearms, even if you bought them as a non-class 3 and converted it over, there was an expense that you had to do. Now, non-class, they're talking about, full auto firearms here. Nobody was giving you these guns or firearms for free, right? Correct. And this one I'm kind of sad to hear, because if there was a source of free full auto guns, I would love to know about that, because hey, not that I can own them legally, but if there's free guns out there, let me know. So I'm sure that had some expense along with the work. Somebody had to work. That's an expense as well. Where did Armory get all the money in order to be able to get those firearms so it would provide the services? Answer. That was funded by Reed, I'm sure. It's been a long time, but... And so, as needed, Reed would insert money into the company so it could buy the firearms that it needed to provide the supply to defense. There's an objection there as to form, but it continues on. That, correct. Armory would acquire, correct. And so there's some further discussion about, what this means, but as I say, and that's my question. So let's go. You make the initial investment. It would say the contract required 3 AR-15s. You would go in, make the conversion to full auto, and then whatever that cost was, if it was $5,000, there would be a lease or some other type of agreement that would cover that from defense so that it wasn't a loss. I don't handle the accounting. That was Clayton, so I don't know exactly how that happened, but yeah. All right. But at the end of the day, you believe in 2010, you believe it was a break-even zero? Oh yeah. I believe so. So basically, what's happening here is that every time this company sort of has no revenue, and it's got this lease that is not like a formal lease. They're sharing all their paperwork and so forth. And every time they need money to buy this stuff, there's sort of a cash injection into this. And then they buy the guns. And then they end up renting them essentially to GWACS. Although GWACS doesn't ever end up sort of officially possessing them. Some Armory employees on site to be like, this is our gun nominally, even though they are so close to each other. And then that lease basically is for exactly the amount they spent getting them. So there's no apparent profit motive for GWACS Armory for a good long time. Their entire purpose is to fund this GWACS defense, or to facilitate this GWACS defense, which, as we've heard, is something that, at least in part, is an anti-gun company. It's, something that its investors like because they're anti-gun and they support what GWACS defense is doing. This is starting to sound a lot less like a conspiracy theory and a lot more like, this is some interesting stuff going on here. So there is a whole lot to this lawsuit. I'm going to be going through a whole lot more. These depositions have some really wild stuff in them. Some really interesting legal theories in them. But I just wanted to start out by sort of talking about a little bit more about what these companies are and what they seem to be about. So let me know in the comments below if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts. But this seems to be a bit strange as to the timeline here. And it's kind of hard to figure out how GWACS Armory gets into selling guns at all. I'm wondering if there might have been some internal tension between, say, Judson Gudgel and Mr. Oppenheimer as to their as to what they really want out of things. So Thank you for watching. I hope that you found this to be interesting or educational. Please like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to see more content. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters at the $50 level, Canada's National Firearms Association, the CCFR, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. All of those at the $50 level. At the $30 level, Sights and Arms Limited. And at $20, Mark, Jane Babe and Luxor, Haywire, Dale Nesbitt, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, and Vicky. Thank you as well to my $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching. I hope this has armed you with knowledge, and as I said, I'm going to keep following this one because it's getting really interesting as I dig into this, and there's a lot of stuff going on that I kind of want to share with you guys. Even though the AR-15 is now banned in Canada, I'm still kind of interested in following along with what's happening here, and yeah, stay tuned.